Hi, my name is Amy Nyworth and I'm an art educator living and working in Columbus, Ohio. I teach K-12 art at Columbus Torah Academy. Thank you so much for joining me for this session called Mundane Merit Badges. We are going to dive into a lesson that I designed for my 7th grade students, but this can be adapted to, I would say, 5th grade and older. The idea for this lesson came to me as I was aiming to boost student engagement and involvement as I was shifting to a different sort of lesson format for our online learning after my school's spring break. So I was thinking, what would pull students in and get them excited about art making? And there's a couple of answers to that. First is personal connections. So adding in aspects of their own lives to their artwork, humor, and of course, Instagram. So I was really inspired by some artists and designers on Instagram who create either illustrations or actual physical merit badges that celebrate everyday achievements of really basic stuff, like remembering to put on your pants or eating breakfast that day. And so that got me thinking, what are some basic mundane achievements that my students could celebrate for themselves during this time of at-home online learning and quarantine? So let's go ahead and jump right in to the lesson plan. We'll move through some of the objectives and key concepts, as well as some art concepts that I wanted my students to focus on for this project as well. Let's get started. So a little bit of background as to what inspired me to create this lesson. The first 3 weeks of our at-home learning, because I thought it would just be temporary, I had my 7th grade students work on open-ended weekly sketchbook assignments. My administration stipulated that the students shouldn't have more than 30 minutes of work from art class per week and that we wouldn't be meeting over Zoom. What I noticed from the work that I was seeing from students is it didn't quite seem like they were spending a full 30 minutes on those open-ended sketchbook assignments. So after we returned from spring break, I decided that my assignments needed to have a little bit more structure to help keep students focused for those 30 minutes. And I started getting some inspiration from things that I thought my students would identify with. And so these merit badges that I saw on Instagram caught my eye. So this presentation that we're going to move through is the same one that I sent out to my students to help build their knowledge base and walk them through the steps and expectations of creating the project. The first slide is just a little bit of background about humor and design, and it includes an illustration of work from home merit badges by Gemma Carell. And if you follow Gemma on Instagram, she has a lot of great illustrations that include tons of observational humor about everyday situations. And she also does a lot of illustrations of pugs. So her work is super cute. And I thought that these merit badges might be a great jumping off point for students to start thinking about what kind of personal merit badges they could earn for themselves for their time of at-home learning. And here are some additional examples of mundane merit badges that I saved from my Instagram. And so you can see that some of them are actual physical badges or patches, and some of them are illustrations. And I love these quarantine merit badges from Melissa Makes Art. I think that she really captured some of the things that both teachers and students alike are engaging with during this time of staying at home. So here are the directions for creating the project. The steps are on the right-hand side, and my examples are on the left-hand side. So first, students had to decide what basic or funny tasks they would like to celebrate, and I had them think of at least 3 things. They can be things the students did or didn't do during their time at home or distance learning, or it could be something from another time during the year. And some examples that I included: not fighting with your sibling, doing all your homework on time, and cooking something on your own. An additional parameter of this project, which you can choose to incorporate or not in your lesson, is utilizing color schemes. Now, for this step, students were challenged to activate their prior knowledge of color schemes, which they learned in a previous lesson, and to incorporate color schemes into their merit badge designs. And one resource that I use to help build students' knowledge base of color schemes is a great video from gcflearnfree.org, which includes a really simple breakdown of color schemes, color theory, and how to use it in design. And so I've included that video in my conference resource section. So for step 2, students had 2 options. One was to pick a color scheme for each of their badge designs, and the other is to pick a color scheme that will be consistent for all the badge designs. And shout out to the Art of Ed for creating this awesome color scheme handout that I've included in my presentation. I love the way that they provide a simple explanation for some of the common color schemes, as well as a visual aid so students can visualize some examples of those particular color schemes. And step 3 is designing the badges. I had my students create at least 3 designs using their color schemes, and I also gave them some options for materials. They could use marker or colored pencil, use digital illustration on a tablet, or make physical badges or ribbons with paper, fabric, or cardboard, or other materials that they had around the house. It was important for me to offer several different options for students because I knew that not everybody had the same access to materials at their homes as we would working together in the classroom. On the left, I've included a breakdown of how I created my example. So first was thinking of that basic task. Next was picking a color scheme, and I used colorhunt.co to find a really cool complementary color scheme. And then I designed my merit badge based on that color scheme. One of the most fun parts of creating this example, besides the art making, of course, was thinking about what kind of personal basic achievement I could celebrate. And for me, that was being able to finally find Lysol wipes at the store. I'm sure all of you remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, and actually a little bit now still also, it's really hard to find those Lysol and Clorox sanitizing wipes at the store. So when my husband and I finally found them, it was like extremely exciting. And I thought this is the perfect thing to create my merit badge example about. So in my Google slide presentation for students, this is the last slide that invites them to think about what kind of mundane merit badges they will create. For this next part, I wanted to give you a quick glimpse into how students were submitting their completed work to me. I created a Google form for students to not only upload images of their work, but to answer some reflection questions as well. This Google form included a reminder of the directions and procedure for the project, and then students needed to select which color scheme they chose for the project, upload some photos, explain why they chose those particular achievements to celebrate, and then I had them reflect on what they think the role of humor could be in art and design. Do they think it's something that we need, or do they think that art and design should just explore serious or neutral topics? When I created the Google form, I set it to be a quiz so that I could assign point values to each question and also be able to read student answers, offer feedback, and then release their scores and the feedback back to the students via email. So I got some really great answers about what students think the role of humor is in art and design. A lot of students think that humor helps us cope with difficult situations. So that was a great insight that I was able to get from my students submitting their thoughts, even when we can't meet together, even through Zoom, to share answers. Okay, so let's talk assessment. Assessing student work in this type of unplanned, emergency, crisis online learning is really a challenge. And so I think at first it's really best to look to our individual schools and admin for guidance, because I think across the board, the expectations of what students should be submitting and producing really look different from school to school. Some of the guidelines that I received from my administration included not grading too harshly and also recognizing the difficulty of access to technology and art supplies that some students might have, so that the expectations that I have for what students produce can't be the same as what I would expect in the classroom. So I needed to modify my expectations to help meet students' needs. Another consideration on the topic of assessment and feedback are the challenges of your students' unique online learning environments. So for example, you as the teacher are not there in person to offer real-time feedback. Unless you are asking for students to submit their in-progress work, oftentimes the feedback comes at the end of the project when student work is already completed. Also, the time frame and project limits are likely going to be different than what we would typically have in class. Usually, my students will work on a project for 45-minute class periods once a week for at least 4 weeks. These projects that I was creating are much smaller and shorter, 30 minutes once a week. I'm sure you can identify with being the type of teacher who is always pushing students to do their best work. So with craftsmanship or materials, I am always encouraging students to explore and experiment. We focus a lot on growth mindset as well as the studio habits in our art class. So stretch and explore, develop craft, and learning, especially in 7th grade, how to take those foundational skills to the next level. Now, during online learning, the expectations were different than what they would typically be in my classroom because, along with my admin, I recognized that students are not in their typical learning environment, and it's very difficult for them to juggle all of the pieces of online learning in all of their different subjects. So that is part of the reason why I was so excited to introduce my students to this project, because it's short, it's sweet, it's got personal connections and humor. So the way that I assessed students is, did they create 3 badge designs? Did they use color schemes? So when they answered the question on the form, did their choices align with the images they submitted? And did they answer the reflection questions using more than one word? If it was just a phrase, I counted it just because I was trying to ease up on some of those typical stringent expectations I would usually have for classroom learning and help students succeed in the project I was offering. So now let's check out some student work. So a quick note about the merit badge on the right outlined in pink in case you were confused as to what it is celebrating. So I teach at a Jewish school. So the student who designed this badge is celebrating a Jewish accomplishment. So he learned 2 plus daf. A daf is a page of Gemara, which is a Jewish text that was codified in the 3rd century CE. It is written in Aramaic, and it is a commentary on a section of writings called the Mishnah. If you've ever heard of the Talmud before, the Gemara is part of the Talmud. So it is quite an accomplishment to be able to read through text in Aramaic and be able to understand what it's saying. Through this project, students were able to use humor and color schemes to create artworks that really have a personal connection and help students express some of the things that they're going through and some of the basic activities they engaged in during this time of at-home learning. Thank you again for joining me for this Mundane Merit Badge lesson plan presentation. I hope that you'll be able to take some of these ideas back to your classrooms, whether you're learning in person or online next fall. And feel free to use the resources and adapt them as you need to best fit your classroom and your learners.